Well, hello there. I'm Dr. Jen. Thanks for joining me today on this location-specific episode all about the first state, Delaware. I actually used to live in Delaware, just FYI. Yeah, let's see. In all of my location-specific episodes, I've included hyperlinks in the show notes. So there's tons. I'm actually going to screen share here in a sec. So if you're watching on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, check this out as we go through. But all of the links I'm going to go through are in the show notes. And each of my location-specific podcasts is set up in the exact same way, answering the same four questions. What are the basics of the tenancy laws in that specific area, in this case, Delaware? What are some of the nuances? What's some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant in Delaware? And then where can you get help in your local area in Delaware? And so those are the four questions as we're going to go through this episode. And as I answer these questions, you'll see me, like I said, screen share, but I'm also going to be tracking at the same time my bingo card, which is my standard items that I see most often in different locations. And then at the very end of the episode, I'll go through that bingo card to help figure out, where are there holes? Where are there some weird things? What's going on in Delaware? Especially if you've got more questions. Now, I have to give you a big disclaimer because even if I get this episode 1000% right 5 minutes after recording, the laws can and do change. And so you must do your own research for your specific rentals in whatever county, city, municipality, any wrinkle of any kind where your rentals are located in Delaware or wherever you are geographically located on the globe. This is not all inclusive, but this is designed to get you started. I'm going to give a shout out to today's sponsor. If you want to know what Mike and I are doing, go to Aloha Capital Investments LLC or alohajv.com. And I'm going to start screen sharing here so that we can jump into finding all about Delaware. Okay, so I am screen sharing the very first hyperlink, which I always start off with the source document, right? And the source document is a law. This is tenancy law, and this is what it is for the state of Delaware, Landlord Tenant Code, Title 25 of the Delaware Code. And so this is 119 pages. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I am not going to go through the whole thing page by page, but you can see very legalese. Why? Because it's a law. Of course it's legalese. So it's going to go, we're just getting through general provisions, lots and lots of hyperlinks that jump to different things, which is great. Summons, fair housing, landlord liens, tenant employee. Oh, a bunch of definitions. That's kind of cool. And what is this? Deceased soul. Okay, this is interesting. Deceased sole tenant shall mean the sole leaseholder under residential rental agreement entitled to occupy a residential rental unit to the exclusion of all others who has died. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. So the residential rental unit at the sole discretion upon the deceased sole tenant that was alive shall immediately terminate upon the death of the sole tenant. Got it. Deceased sole tenant. So, well, that makes sense because there's a lot of places we talk about death a lot on this show because there's a lot of folks who are renting who want to pass in their own unit. And I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about transitions as people transition into hospitals, long-term care, or they pass in their unit. Um, so there's a lot that's going to go on coming up, I project. So, boy, that just turned really somber. Wow. Okay, we're gonna keep going up and up. Landlord obligation, tenancy agreement. Oh, what is this? Assurance money prohibited. Oh yeah. Okay. That's key money. It's basically a bribe. Bribes are prohibited. Yes, indeed. I understand. Here it is. Assurance money prohibited in every transaction where an application is made by a prospective tenant to a lease for a dwelling, a prospective landlord or owner dwelling shall not ask for nor receive any assurance money or other payment which is not an application fee, security deposit, security bond fee, or premium pet deposit, or similar deposit reserving the dwelling unit. Basically, a bribe. You're not allowed to have that. Yep. Okay. But you can have an application fee. Except for an optional service fee for actual services rendered, such as a pool fee or tennis court fee, a landlord shall not charge a fee to a tenant for any non-refundable fee as a condition for the occupancy. Okay, interesting. I wonder how many times I say that in these episodes. Probably a lot. Okay, then it goes into bed bugs, and there's a bunch. Oh, here we go. Landlord remedies for absence or abandonment. Here we go. This is one of our big bingo card items. Okay. Extended absence notification. So if someone's going to be gone for a while, you need to have the tenant tell you, which is fine. If the tenant wrongfully quits the rental unit or unequivocally indicates by words or deeds the tenant's intention to not resume tenancy, such as by the tenant shall entitle the landlord to proceed specified elsewhere in the chapter, and the tenant may be liable for the lesser of the following for such abandonment: either the entire rent due for the remainder of the term, so it's an acceleration. There is an acceleration, or all rent accrued during the period reasonably necessary to re-rent the premises. Okay, well, that's what we end up doing is if someone's vacating early, there's no acceleration where our rentals are. And so acceleration means like if someone rents for a year and if they break the lease 6 months in, if there is an acceleration clause, that means when they break it, then they have to either pay or be responsible for the remainder of the lease. And where our rentals are, there is no acceleration, but there are locations in North America where there is an acceleration clause. But you can also just re-rent the unit, or the tenant can help you re-rent the unit. I'm not a big fan of the tenant. I like to screen my own tenants. Okay. This is really, really wordy. I think what I'm going to end up doing, let's check out some of the other resources. Like there's a bunch in here, and we can talk more about this, but let's just talk about here. Yeah, let's just go to the next one. Okay, so the second one I've got Delaware Code Online. This is the same thing. Title 25 Residential Landlord Code, but this is one of the specific parts of it, landlord and landlord obligation tenant remedies. So basically, this is termination at beginning of term. Okay, landlord obligation. Okay, ba ba ba. Tenants remedies. Fire and casualty damage. Assurance money prohibited. We've talked about this. No assurance money. I've never heard it called that before. Prohibited. Okay, we haven't gotten into the user-friendly guide yet, but that's okay. That's coming. All right, let's keep going. This one is just a two-pager. This is the third hyperlink, the Delaware Landlord Tenant Code. This is from the Attorney General of Delaware Department of Justice. And so they are talking about, this is just sort of an overview. So it's basically a trifold slick that you would give away in hard copy, but they've got it PDF. So I've got the hyperlink here. Information for landlords. You're required to honor the terms of the lease agreement. There are conditions under which you may file for eviction. So this is just talking about eviction. The tenant stays in the unit without permission after the end of the lease, so it does end abruptly, right? So, so there is a discussion about an overhold situation. Tenant fails to pay rent after 5 days of written notice. 5 days of written notice. Tenant takes deduction from the rent that they should not have. That's important. Tenant has violated the terms of the lease or other requirements. Tenant has been convicted of a felony or a Class A misdemeanor or felony that threatens harm to a person or property during tenancy. Wow. Okay. Um, you can evict. That's different. As a landlord, you have responsibilities, including begin making repairs to residents within 10 days of receiving notice from the tenant that repairs are needed, and inform the tenant in writing if he or she breaks the rules of the rental agreement or neglects the rental unit. If the tenant does not correct the problem within 7 days of written notice, you may terminate the lease and file for eviction. Try to work with your tenants. If you screen them properly, you should have a good working relationship with them, but you've got to work with them, and sometimes that changes, right? So same slick. Let's go over to information for tenants. A lease is a contract that the law requires you to follow, but the law also lets a tenant out of a lease early. Oh, this is interesting. If a tenant's employer requires that he or she moves at least 30 miles away, job move. Okay. The tenant or family member who lives with the tenant has a serious illness. That's also a thing. Tenant is accepted for admission into a senior citizens facility, group facility, or retirement home. We just talked about that regarding aging tenants. Further, the tenant is accepted into government or nonprofit subsidized housing. The tenant enters the U.S. military on active duty. The tenant is a victim of domestic violence, abuse, sexual offense, stalking, or and has complained against the appropriate, has a filed complaint against the appropriate agency, or if a tenant dies in this circumstance, the surviving spouse or personal representative of the tenant may then end the lease. So this is good. This is absolutely good. That you have this idea that it's reality that you're going to have start to finish folks involved as a tenant ages and their health begins to fail. So that's actually really good. Okay, so let's go to the next hyperlink. How to file and defend a summary possession action in the Justice of the Peace Court. Now, this is already jumping into more of the mischief part of this. I was hoping that we would start with more of the application and lease and condition inspection and stuff like that as we get into it. And then this would be later in the bits, but we might have to go back to the source documents for the landlord tenant code. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. But so this is going right into eviction, right? Eviction and possession of a unit. Uh, New interactive forms, claims for tenants and landlords. Return of security deposit. Let's go to this one. Let's see what this says. Return of security deposit. So this is basically a template of a letter, request for return of security deposit, where the tenant is writing the landlord a request for security deposit. And this is Legal Services Corporation of Delaware, which is a nonprofit. And interesting. Okay. Let's see if their landlord tenant code online version is any different than the one that I have. Nope, it's the same one. Okay, that's okay. That's a good one. Okay, this is, let's just, oh, it jumps down. Okay. So this is the Delaware Courts Judicial Branch Landlord Tenant Help page that I've got hyperlinked in the show notes. And it talks about what summary possession is. Landlord tenant code, rental agreement. And then it goes into grounds for seeking summary possession. Yeah, we've already gone through some of these. By an owner when the tenant has stayed for more. Okay. Failure to pay rent. Okay, so here is this one. A written demand for payment and notice that payment for rent owed must be made within time mentioned in the notice, must be given or sent to the tenant before bringing action for summary possession. So you basically have to give them notice to pay rent before you can file for eviction. And I think that's pretty standard. The time specified to make the payment must be at least 5 days after the date of notice for residential units and 25 days for rentals of lots of mobile homes. So for example, if the notice is given on Friday, August 1st, the landlord must give the tenant until at least August 8th, so 5 business days, to pay the rent before filing an action for summary possession. Weekends and legal holidays are excluded when the time period is less than 7 days. And then the court action can be filed on August 9th or later. But if they are against the rules and there is mischief involved, advance written notice specifying the rule allegedly violated and providing an opportunity for the tenant to correct the rule violations must generally be given or sent to the tenant. So basically, if they're misbehaving, they need to smarten up. No advance notice is required if a breach by a tenant causes or threatens to cause irreparable harm to any person or property, or the tenant is convicted of a Class A misdemeanor or felony during the term of the tenancy, which is caused by or threatened to cause irreparable harm to any person or property. So very interesting. So if they get themselves into trouble, if the tenant gets themselves into trouble during the tenancy, you can't evict them on that. Termination of the rental agreement, the expiration of the rental agreement. Okay, unless otherwise provided in the rental agreement, the tenant should be getting a or given or sent written notice of termination at least 60 days before the end of the rental term. You can't just let it expire. You've got to communicate with them, right? So you got to say, you know what, I intend to not renew, or, that's notice of termination. And if there's been no misconduct, the landlord may only refuse to renew a rental agreement if there'll be a change in the land use, which means it does actually shift to month to month. But if you're in a month to month agreement, the tenant must be given at least 60 days written notice within 60-day period. Federally subsidized units, commercial rentals. Commercial rentals are different because it's not a dwelling, right? That's typically usually what it is. Okay, so this is walking you through all the judicial action for this on how you do it. Complaint form, let's just look at what the complaint form looks like. All complaints. Um, oh, is this the right one? Abandoned personal property forms. Hmm, this one is not there. Instructions for filing petition for, oh, it's because it is a attachment. Okay, okay. Let's see what it says here. Let me move the screen share to the new one, which is, okay, wait a minute. This says protected. Okay, hang on, hang on. Let me regroup here. Okay, enable editing. That's why I can see there. Okay, so let me go back in so I can screen share this one. And here it is, abandoned personal property for the state of Delaware. So this is and it's a Word document. This is kind of interesting. So court address, plaintiff, defendant, super legal, individual corporation, court service. Wow. Okay, well, that's not really civil complaint. That's just a generic civil complaint no matter what. Okay, let's go to the next one because that is instructions for this one. Let's look at this one. Stop sharing and then let's go to this one. Civil instructions, because this looks like this is the one. It says instructions for filing petition for title for abandoned personal property in the Justice of the Peace Court for the state of Delaware. So fill out and fill with the court. So you still have to do the first form, Civil 51. Now this is in the event you've had a tenant that has now departed the unit, abandoned the unit, you've deemed it abandoned, you have possession of the unit, now you've got their chattels, their things, their personal property, and now what do you do? So now you've got to go to the court, you've got to file this, it looks like. If the property is a motor vehicle, then you've got to have the title, which you may or may not have. If the property is a motor vehicle or trailer or mobile home. For any other property, a copy of lien searches. This looks like just like abandoned vehicles, though. This doesn't look like chattels. I don't think this is the right thing. This is weird. Hmm. Okay. I am going back because I don't think this is the right one. This just seems super strange. Um, let's go back in. I think we've messed this up. This is landlord tenant abandoned property. That was the, nope, that's the right one. Abandoned Form 56. The below forms will be issued to you in court. Okay, I'm going back in to share so you can see what I'm looking at. So if you are in, so first of all, if you are in a situation as a Delaware landlord, it looks like you just need to go to your local courthouse and start asking questions because it looks like most of it starts with a justice of the peace. However, there are other locations where you can ask for help. So let's talk about this for a second. So I have two different help items in the show notes. So the first one is the law help interactive.org. Now, I'm not a real big fan of generic websites, but it looks like this is actually how you file for Delaware summary possession. And you upload it, right? You create a login, this, or you can start as a guest. Let's start as a guest. Let's just go down this way and see how it is. Start interview as a guest. Interview. Interactive process will be used by either a landlord or tenant seeking possession of a residential rental unit. Yeah. This process may be used by a tenant. Yeah. Okay. Continue. This is interesting. Um, so this is just for possession. This is not for money. Also, this process is used as a held over after a mortgage or foreclosure sale. Do not use it for that. Okay. You've got to go to the justice of the peace by clicking here. Okay. Well, let's click there. Okay. Justice of the peace course location. So depending on where you are, I know Delaware's not that big, but there's all kinds of places. We used to live in Georgetown, actually. There it is. So there's all kinds of places where you can ask for questions, and I guarantee you they will be helpful. So if you have a question and you are not sure where to start for landlord stuff in Delaware, go to your local justice of the peace because they will help you. Ask a law librarian. There's all kinds of fun stuff in here. And I haven't forgotten, we haven't hardly answered one thing on my bingo card yet. So I haven't quite gotten that yet. Forms. Let's go to forms here. So this is Delaware courts, affidavit, abandoned property, supplemental stuff, fill in. And that's not, boy, oh, there's a lot of forms. Wow. Forms by court, family court, superior court, no. Forms by subject, let's see if we have it. Landlord tenant, 9 forms. Okay, that'll be helpful. Affidavit of good cause, answer for enforcement of out-of-state judgment, defendant's demand for bill particulars, procedure for garnishing, foreign server, okay, special process, how to file, defend, summary possession action in Spanish, how to file and defend summary possession, Delaware resources for litigants. Okay. Affidavit for good cause. Let's see what that is. Affidavit. Okay, so in the justice of the peace regarding this, and this, okay, I swear that I are the true. Okay, so basically that you are affirming. Okay, interesting. Never seen that before. Okay, so those don't look very landlord tenant helpful, except for the summary possession ones. So this is the how to file for this. Oh, and it's 12 pages. So maybe, you know what? I'm going to add this to the show notes because the other ones don't seem to be super helpful. Interesting. Okay, so this is Delaware summary session. Okay, let's just see how far this goes because we haven't really. Who may file? What about manufactured homes? What about rental agreements? And then this, we've actually seen this before and why you can do this. How are the time periods computed? What information? So this is really, really how to do it. But this is not, should I prepare for a trial? We've been to trial. Oh, and then all the filing fees. Wow, there's a lot of filing fees. Wow. Abandoned property suit, filing fees, $45. And so it sounds like that's part of it. So if you've got, I think that's the answer at this point, is that if you have an abandoned unit situation with chattels, with personal property of your tenant, then you're going to have to go to the justice of the peace at this point. We haven't quite gotten to that far, and we may not. This one is the same request for a return of security deposit that we saw before. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the original landlord tenant code because we didn't actually get anything more user friendly, which is kind of surprising. Is usually when I do these landlord location specific episodes, there's usually the long form, which is the law part. And then there's usually sort of like a user friendly, like a guide. And I'm not seeing that in Delaware. I think there's a lot of self-help. I mean, Delaware, if anybody's ever been to Delaware, it is not a very big place and they're super helpful, which I'm not really sure how to take that, there's not a user-friendly one. But again, there might be resources that I didn't get. So if I've missed something, which I probably have, you can message me and then make a comment on this. But I want to go through this because I do want to get through my bingo card stuff. And now that we know that we don't have anything additional other than this source document, that's then we have to go back to the tenancy landlord tenant code, which is fine, which is absolutely fine. Okay, so I'm just looking at the table of contents here. And there's a lot for conversion of manufactured homes, manufactured home communities, agriculture leases, commercial leases, tenants receivership, summary possession, which I think we've gone into already, and then tenant obligations, landlord remedies. I think I'm just going to start. This is all definitions. Subchapter 2. Look a bit. Oh, that was it. Okay, so boy, very legalese, but it looks like a good chunk of this at the back. It doesn't apply to residential leases. But we don't have anything. At this point, all I have on the bingo card is the tenant application fee is yes, you can charge a fee, but it looks like it is only for actually qualifying the tenant, right? You can't do any assurance money as we've seen, right, so far. Let's see, rental agreement term, termination of rental agreement. No rental agreement unless in writing shall be effective longer than 1 year. And then when no term is expressly provided, a rental agreement shall be deemed month to month. That's pretty typical. Subject to the provisions of this title, landlord may terminate any rental agreement other than month to month by giving minimum 60 days written notice to the tenant. And the same thing. So proper notice for terminating for either the landlord or the tenant is 60 days. So that's proper notice. All right. Renewals and rental agreements with modifications. So if the landlord intends to renew the rental agreement subject to with amended modifications for the lease, the landlord should give a minimum of 60 days written notice prior to the expiration of the rental agreement and subject to the amended modified provisions, including but not limited to the length of term, amount, security deposit, rent. Such notice shall specify the modified provisions. Yeah, okay. And let's see, if the tenant rejects the modified terms, then the rejected notice of renewal shall be considered effective termination notice. So basically there's got a conversation right around 60 days before the end of the lease, which assuming it would be a fixed term, either 6 months or 1 year. And then 60 days from the end, if the landlord says, I want to up your rent, or I want to do this change, and the tenant doesn't agree, basically turns into a notice of departure at the end of the lease, right? Now that kind of makes sense, right? Okay, rental agreement. We've talked about this already. Attorney's fees prohibited. I've heard of this actually. There's been a discussion about this, about attorney's fees prohibited. No provision in a rental agreement provided for the recovery of attorney's fees by either party in any suit, action, or proceeding arising from the tenancy shall be enforceable. And what ends up happening is if one person had it, we've seen this in other states, but if one person has the attorney's fees in their side, then it automatically is deemed to the other side as well. And it just gets to be this escalating thing back and forth. And so in Delaware, it's just said, screw it, attorney's fees not allowed. Done. Right? That's the way it is. Uh, okay, services of notice. We've already talked a little bit about that. Application, fair housing provisions. No discrimination on any item, right? At all, any characteristic. And some of these are federal and some of these are actually, this is all state, but it's based on federal. Landlord liens, distress for rent. If the landlord, the right of the landlord for distress of rent is hereby abolished. Yeah. So a landlord can't go in and just start taking possessions because tenant hasn't paid rent. You can't do that. Let's see, tenant employee. When the employment of a tenant employee is terminated by the employer, if the employer is the landlord, then the landlord must offer the tenant employee the opportunity to enter into a written rental agreement for specified rent. Basically, yeah, they're allowed to get housing remain in the housing there, but if this person is going to be let go by the employer, they are allowed to go get employment elsewhere and still be a resident. And then there's a bunch of definitions. We did start to go through these. I'm not going to go through all of them, just looking at this. Holdover tenant, we've seen that already. Those are terms that are used when a term ends abruptly. So that aligns. Legal holiday. Normal wear and tear shall mean the deterioration in the condition of a property or premises by the ordinary and reasonable use of such property or premises. Pet deposit. All right. Pet deposit shall mean any deposit made to the landlord by a tenant to be held for the term of the rental agreement or any part thereof for the presence of an animal in the rental unit. Awesome. Yes, I have heard about the pet deposit. That is actually a first in a long time that I've seen a pet deposit of some kind. And then it defines a security deposit and support animal. Let's see what they say support animal, because a support animal and a service animal are different and they do not define. I don't see service animal defined. Interesting. So support animal shall mean any animal individually trained to do work or perform tasks to meet the requirements of a disabled person, including but not limited to minimal protection work, rescue work, pulling a wheelchair, or retrieving dropped items. So support animal, they have to be real careful here because support animal and service animal in this one, it looks like their definition is pretty close. I don't know if that's the same. Okay. Okay. Let's go into this further landlord obligation. Rental agreement shall not provide the tenant. Oh, listen to this. A rental agreement shall not provide that a tenant must declaw a cat as a condition of a rental agreement. Okay, not require declaw cat. Interesting. It's right in there. Okay, well, declawing the cat is pretty invasive, so okay, it makes sense. Okay, tenant remedy, tenant at the beginning of the term. So basically what happens if a landlord fails to provide a unit, like let's say there's either renovation going on or new construction going on or some reason why a landlord can't provide the unit when they've agreed to provide it, then the tenant has a remedy and it's quite a long aspect of this remedy. But basically the landlord's got to house these people. That's the way it has to be. Tenant's remedies for failure to supply possession. Yep. So the tenant can either terminate the rental agreement, which may be bad because again, these people are trying to move, right? Landlord's obligation relating to the rental agreement. Landlord shall at all times during the tenancy comply with all the provisions of different codes, provide the rental unit which shall not endanger the health, welfare, or safety of the tenants. Keep a clean sanitary of common area, building, grounds, facilities, and appurtenances. Yep. Make all repairs and arrangements necessary. Maintain electrical, plumbing, and other facilities. Um, tenant's remedies relating to the rental unit. And basically, if the landlord doesn't do what they're supposed to do, then the tenant can either terminate or they can remedy, right? Fire casualty damage fees. Hmm. Okay, so except for optional service fee, the actual service is rendered. We talked about this already. Pool fee or tennis court fee, a landlord shall not charge a tenant for any non-refundable fee as a condition of the occupancy of the rental unit. Nothing in this section shall prevent the tenant from electing, subject to the landlord's acceptance, to purchasing an optional surety bond in combination with a security deposit. So you can have a surety bond with deposit, basically a cash deposit at the same time. That's kind of different. Not all places do that. Okay, we still don't know how much a security deposit has to be, though. We haven't seen that yet. So this is now metering and charges for utility services, how this all works, bulk billing, unlawful ouster or exclusion of a tenant, tenant's right to early termination, which we've already talked about in that brochure. It talked about all the different reasons why, like if they go into active duty or they're subject to some kind of violence, domestic violence, etc., stalking, things like that. Bed bug infestation is a big thing. So it's talking about all about the suspected infestations and just looking at this. So this is the next section is about tenant obligation and landlord remedies. So tenant must pay rent and okay. So here's the late charge. Okay, so this is definitely on the bingo card. Okay, so when the rental agreement provides for a late charge, so if you're going to charge a late fee as a landlord, you've got to have it in the lease. That makes sense, and you've got to do that. Rent shall be uniformly a proportion day to day, and where the rental agreement provides a late charge payable to the landlord for rent not paid at the agreed time, the late charge shall not exceed 5% of the monthly rent. That's what we're looking for. Not to exceed 5% of rent. Late charge is considered additional rent for the purposes of the code and shall not be imposed within 5 days of the agreed time rent. So there is a 5-day grace period. And the landlord shall, in the county where the rental unit is located, maintain an office or permanent place for the receipts of payments. Okay, the landlord shall, in the county in which the rental unit is maintained, maintain an office or other permanent place for receipts of payments where the rent may be timely paid. Okay, well, that makes sense. We've done that as well, where if people want to pay, yeah, so failure to maintain such an office or other permanent place of payment where rent may be timely paid shall extend the agreed upon time for payment of rent by 3 days beyond the due date. So you can actually pay even later because people are trying to pay their rent. Yeah. And if a landlord accepts cash for payment of rent, the landlord shall within 15 days give the tenant a receipt for that payment. And you've got to keep all your receipts. Yep. Okay, so then what happens if a tenant fails to pay rent? We've already talked about late fees. And what happens if a tenant is not behaving regarding waste? So tenant shall, there's all kinds of, this is interesting actually. There's all kinds, a tenant shall dispose from the rental unit all ashes, rubbish, garbage, or any other organic or flammable waste. Venting, you got to have venting. We put that in our lease addendums for sure. Defense to an action for waste. And let's see, here we go. Tenant obligation notice of extended absence. Yes. Landlord's remedies for abandonment. Okay, so we talked about some of this. This doesn't actually say anything about abandonment items. It just says about the money, but it doesn't actually talk about what to do if a tenant leaves their personal property. This is talking about landlord remedy for unreasonable refusal to allow access. So if a tenant isn't allowing access, what to do. And landlord remedies regarding, oh, here we go. Security deposit. Bingo. Here we go. A landlord may require the payment of a security deposit. No landlord may require a security deposit in excess of 1 month's rent where the rental agreement is for 1 year or more. And it's 1 year or 1 month. Okay. And let's see after this. After the expiration of 1 year, the landlord shall immediately return as a credit to the tenant any security deposit amount in excess of 1 month's rent. Okay. Including such amount. Okay, so security deposit limit set forth does not apply to fully furnished rental units. So if it's fully furnished, then you can charge an additional fee. Okay, so if it's additional 1 month deposit unless furnished. Cool. Okay, security deposit shall be placed by the landlord in an escrow bank account in a federally insured banking institution with an office that accepts deposit within the state of Delaware. Such account shall be designated as a security deposit account and not be used in any of the operations. Yes, for sure. And the tenant needs to know where it is. The purpose of the security deposit shall be to reimburse the landlord for actual damages caused to the premises by the tenant exceeding normal wear and tear, to pay the landlord for all rental arrearage, and to reimburse for all reasonable expenses. So, but where the tenant is required to pay a fee to determine the tenant's credit worthiness is an application fee, which we've already agreed that we can charge, but let's talk about it. Talks about how much it is. The application fee shall not exceed the greater of 10% of the monthly rent for the unit or $50 to determine the tenant's credit worthiness. So it's yes, not to exceed 10% of rent or $50. Okay. Uh, the landlord shall, okay, fine. This is the return of the security deposit. That's weird that they threw the application fee in the middle of the security deposit stuff, but that's okay. If the landlord is not entitled to any or all portion of the security deposit, the landlord shall remit the security deposit within 20 days of expiration or termination of the rental agreement. 20 days. Got it. Mm-mm-mm. Penalty, failure to remit the security deposit or the difference between security deposit and the amount set forth. Double, the tenant shall be entitled to double the amount of wrongfully withheld. Yep. Pet deposits. Here we go. This doesn't normally get in here. A landlord may require a pet deposit. Damage to the rental unit caused by an animal shall be first deducted from the pet deposit, and where the pet deposit is insufficient, such damages may be deducted from the security deposit. Pet deductions, pet deposit is subject to sections in this section. No landlord may require a pet deposit in excess of 1 month's rent, regardless of duration. Okay. And this is 1 month's rent also. And then a landlord may require an additional deposit from a tenant with a pet, but shall not require any pet deposit from the tenant if the pet is a duly certified trained support animal for a disabled person, which is normal because an animal with a job is not a pet. So if the rental agreement so specifies, a landlord may increase the security deposit commensurate with the rent. If the increase of the security deposit will exceed 10% of the monthly rent, payment of the increased security shall be prorated over the term of the rental agreement. Okay, and then it goes into, surety bonds, how the surety bond will work. I'm not going to go into the surety bond because it's making claim of this and it's quite long. So if you want to know more about how to use surety bonds for this, as a part of the security deposit aspect of it, it's on page 34 and it goes into 35 as well. So we're just going to leave that because it's going crazy into detail here. Retaliatory acts. So this is a retaliatory act for the landlord A retaliatory act is an attempt on the part of the landlord to pursue an action for summary possession or otherwise cause the tenant to quit the rental unit involuntarily, demand an increase in rent, or decrease the services. So basically, you're trying to get this person out or you're trying to really make them uncomfortable. And it's typically when a tenant has made a complaint or filed a code violation, some kind of something against the landlord. And so then the landlord knee jerks and retaliates. So typically, there is a timing for how long a landlord cannot act in any way, which is try to evict, try to increase the rent, or try to decrease services, or a combination. And in this case, in Delaware, it looks like it's 90 days. If the tenant proves that the landlord has instituted any of the above actions within 90 days of any complaints, then it's deemed to be retaliatory. So yes, that is defined. And unless it's completely justified, like you've really got to try to make sure that if you're a landlord trying to get someone out after they've made a code violation or a complaint or formed a tenants union or something like that, you've got to really watch. Preference of rent. Okay, there's a lot to retaliatory acts. I'm not going to go too far into it, but there's quite a bit to it. Preference of rent in cases of execution. Oh, this is about abandonment. Okay, great. This is great. Okay, liability of goods levied upon for 1 year's rent. If goods, chattels, or crops of a tenant being upon premises held by the tenant of demise under rent of money are seized by virtue of a process of execution, attachment, or sequestration, the goods and chattels shall be liable for 1 year's rent of premises in arrear and growing due at the time of seizure in preference to property. Accordingly, the landlord shall be paid such rent not exceeding 1 year rent out of the proceeds. Interesting. It's sort of like abandoned items, but it's like that's different than I've ever seen. Hmm. That's not quite how I've seen it in the past. All right, I think this is going into the last bit of this, right to legal representation, evictions, landlord, other landlord tenant actions. I'm just going to read through some of this because there's a lot, like we haven't talked about condition inspections, leases. There's not been anything about the lease wording, rent increases, abusive access. There's not been any talk of any of that. So let's just see if any of that's there. And if not, then we're going to jump into reviewing the bingo card and we'll wrap it up. But okay, right to legal representation, both as the landlord and the tenant. Implementation, summary possession. Okay, so this goes into the legalese of eviction and actually going into justice of the peace and going into potentially a trial for summary proceeding to get a unit back. Remember, the goal of an eviction is an empty unit, just trying to get the possession of the unit back, not the money. Okay. I'm just going down, 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 jury trial. Okay, so it's getting into the legalese of the trials, and then we go into tenant receivership. So if a tenant goes into bankruptcy, for example, then how this all works, receivership procedures, discharge of the receivership, and then it goes into the different leases. So like commercial leases, agriculture leases, mobile home, things like that. So it doesn't look like there is, let's just straight up ask AI a little bit about this. Let's just go Delaware, standard lease. Let's just come see what comes up with Delaware standard lease. So of course there's a bunch of like buy it, free, whatever, rocket lawyer, blah, blah, blah. So I usually go to AI and just go the standard Delaware lease agreement outlines and terms, conditions. Okay. But it's all coming from these prepaid ones, right? It doesn't look like there is like a template one, which is what I was looking for. I was looking for a template one provided from the state of Delaware. So doesn't look like there is one. What else are we missing from the bingo card. In fact, let me start at the top. So tenant application fee, we've already talked about that. Yes, a tenant can be charged a tenant application fee not to exceed 10% of the rent or a $50 fee. There is a $5 grace period for late fee without penalty, and the late fee cannot exceed 5% of the rent. Security deposit can be 1 month rent amount and can be a blend of a surety bond with a cash deposit. Lease wording, I haven't seen any lease wording. It is implying of what should be included in the lease, but there's no standard template that we could find, and haven't seen any other details. And is there an emergency contact required in the event of tenant abandonment, incapacitation, death, or imprisonment? It's not required, but there's quite a bit in here as tenant's age, and so it's implied. Now, of course, it's always best practices to have a emergency contact. Pets and animals. Is a pet deposit or pet rent mentioned? Yes, pet deposit. It was 1 month's rent. And is delivery of a signed lease required? What about condition inspection at move-in? Let's do Delaware condition inspection. Condition inspection checklist. Let's see what's coming up. Uh, now see, here's town of Selbyville. There's one specifically for Delaware. Residential inspect. So this is the town of Selbyville. So this is where they're actually looking at, oh, it's just a one pager. This doesn't look like a landlord tenant one though. Interesting. Okay, so I don't think that's the right one. So it's just a residential inspection. Like if the city was going to inspect one, that's what it looks like. And then you've got Newcastle, Delaware. Let's see what Newcastle has to say here. Okay, inspection checklist, general, swimming pool, manufacturer, tie down, mechanical plumbing, building codes. I don't see it. I don't see it. Okay. Town of Clayton, Delaware. So see, this is exactly why if you are a landlord in Delaware, please, please, please know your local area because you've got to make sure. So this is if the town of Clayton wants to do an inspection, this is what they're going to inspect. Now, this is not between a landlord and a tenant. This is between the landlord, owner, and the city. Yeah, so this is the rental inspection requirement. So this is different, but this is even more reason why you've got to do your own research on what's required. Because it looks like code official will check during inspection. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, you've got to do your own stuff. Inspect Delaware. This is like property checklist. Okay, that's not what we're looking for. I don't see any standard forms or the only letter that we saw was the request for a security deposit return. We did see a draft letter from that. Rent increase. Never saw anything about a rent increase. However, at the end of a fixed lease, we were talking about how 60 days in, a landlord can potentially modify the lease to include a rent increase, but it didn't talk about it. Let's actually Google it and say rent increase, Delaware rent increase notice. In Delaware, landlords must provide at least 60 days written notice before increasing month to month and no limits on the amount. Uh-huh. So this makes sense based on what we're seeing. There's no rent control. Delaware does not have statewide rent control laws. Tenant rights, typically within 15 days of the notice. So that makes sense at the end of a fixed term that you have 60 days. And if a landlord wants to change any of the terms, including the amount of rent, you still have to give 60 days. Uh, I'm just scrolling down here a second. What is this one? Delaware Code. Oh, that's manufactured homes. Okay, doesn't apply. Okay, there we go. So that's rent increase. How much can rent be increased in Delaware? There is no amount. No mention of renter's insurance. I didn't see anything about abuse of access or what would be a proper notice for Delaware landlord to give proper notice for entry into one of the units. And nor did I see any hours, like daylight hours that you're allowed to enter a unit with proper notice. Like usually it's, 7, 8, 9 a.m. in the morning to sometime at night. So you can't go in at 3 in the morning for no reason, right? Landlord retaliation was defined. I'm going to stop sharing. Landlord retaliation was defined. In fact, there was a lot on landlord retaliation. I was actually shocked. Uh, End of fixed lease is abrupt. Nothing about a condition inspection at move out, return of deposit or bond timing, and there was a bunch of stuff about the surety bond that if you're going to make a claim against it, a bunch of stuff about that. That was 20 days you have until you've got to do something with the security deposit or the surety bond. You can use the deposit as last month's rent. And then it goes into some of the eviction stuff. How long can you give for notice of eviction due to non-payment of rent and utilities, or notice of eviction due to mischief? So the non-payment of rent is 15 days. The notice of eviction due to mischief is 7 days. And abandoned items, remember, again, there's usually like value of items. This is personal property left behind by a tenant that has abandoned a unit. Value of items, administration, inventory, storage timing, disposition instructions. I didn't see any of that. So if you have got questions about abandoned items, just go to your local justice of the peace in Delaware. And then that's probably the answer. I didn't see a whole lot regarding legal aid in Delaware. Um, in fact, we had some of these, but like it's almost amazing that we haven't actually seen a whole lot of help. delegalhelplink.org. Okay. I'm actually gonna, whoops, no, that's a broken link too. Okay. In fact, let me just type in Delaware landlord help because I'm not seeing. It looks like every single county or state or something has got its own thing in Delaware. So just make sure that wherever your rentals are in Delaware, that you are completely up to speed and just start at your local justice of the peace, right? Delaware courts, help. No, it goes right to summary possession. It doesn't go to how do you make a lease. That's really interesting to me. Hmm. Okay. Okay. Well, let's just wrap it up. Each of my location-specific podcasts is set up in the exact same way, answering the same 4 questions. What are the basics of that state or location? In this case, Delaware. What are the nuances of that location? What's different? What stands out? And then guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant. Where to get help in your local area. And as you did that, you saw me keep track on my bingo card of standard items that I see most often in tenancy laws in these different locations, which helps as a summary for this location. This is the same format for every specific location, specific episode. So if you're interested in another geographic area or you're just curious, you already know what I'm going to talk about. You already know the format. It's just a different location. But again, I must tell you that this episode is not all inclusive. You saw as I was screen sharing that there was all kinds of different locations, different requirements from different places. So make sure you are researching your local area. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, chances are that you're either new to being a Delaware landlord or you already are a Delaware landlord. So things you can do to help yourself is read the Landlord Tenant Code for Delaware, and even better, get into the conversation where other Delaware landlords are. And you can either do that in person or virtually. In person, there are other meetup groups. But you can start on social media. There are all kinds of landlord groups online, and just say, "Hey, I'm from Delaware." Da 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 da. There may even be special social media groups for Delaware landlords. So make sure you're looking about that. But check out your local meetup groups. Get where the other Delaware landlords are asking questions. That's the answer. That's the way to do it, is to learn from them. But jump on social media and ask. And lots of local folks are asking questions just like you are. And there's probably some pretty seasoned landlords around too that you can learn from, which is good. So I hope you enjoyed today's show all about Delaware. Don't forget to subscribe and check out rental lessons from around the globe. I'm recording this today from Maui, Hawaii. And I always ask that why? because real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode live right now in the library, episode 217 about the U.S. state of Wisconsin. I'll see you there.